The horrifying reality of life under Slaanesh begins with music that should never be heard. I remember when our world, Calixis Prime, was known for beauty. Now I watch as nobles applaud while musicians bleed from their fingertips, their faces locked in ecstasy. The compositions grow more complex each week, the audiences grow more hungry. I feel it changing me too. My senses sharpen, colors burn brighter, sounds cut deeper. The invitation came yesterday, printed on warm parchment that seemed to pulse against my skin. They call it the endless spiral. They say it will transcend all boundaries of sensation. What they do not say, what I am only beginning to understand, is that every note feeds something vast and hungry beneath our marble halls, something that has been waiting for us to invite it in. I remember when the music first changed, not all at once, but in subtle ways that only those with trained ears would notice. I was still Lucan Var then, heir to House Var, patron of 100 artistic societies on Calixis Prime. We prided ourselves on cultural refinement, you see. Our world was to be the jewel of the sector, a place where beauty flourished amid the uncaring void of space. The shift came gradually, new compositions featuring dissonant notes that lingered too long. Sculptures with proportions that disturbed the eye while drawing it deeper. Perfumes that smelled of summer flowers but left the faintest aftertaste of copper on the tongue. We called it innovation. We called it the evolution of art. We were blind. I attended the first performance of The Endless Spiral at the Grand Harmonic Hall. Composer Elra Vistain had been my personal discovery, plucked from obscurity on the lower levels. Her music had always pushed boundaries, but this new symphony promised to transcend them entirely. The nobility of 3 continents secured invitations. The Emperor's planetary governor himself sat in the royal box, though his eyes seemed distant, unfocused. I wonder now if he already knew what was happening to our world. The orchestra was 300 strong. The chorus numbered 500 voices. When they began to play, something awakened inside me. The music did not simply enter my ears, it penetrated my skin, resonated in my bones, pulsed along my nerves in ways both painful and exquisite. I gripped the armrests of my seat as the tempo increased. As the harmonies grew more complex, more demanding, I did not notice when the first musician began to bleed. The violinist in the 3rd row, her fingers moving so rapidly across the strings that her fingertips split open. She continued playing, face ecstatic, as crimson droplets flew from her hands with each stroke of the bow. By the time the symphony reached its crescendo, half the orchestra showed similar signs of self-mutilation in service to the music. The audience did not gasp in horror. We applauded until our palms bruised. That night marked the beginning, though I did not recognize it then. How could I? I was raised to appreciate beauty in all its forms. I was taught that artistic expression was the highest calling of humanity. I believed the Imperial creed permitted such pursuits alongside devotion to the God Emperor. I was wrong about everything. The next morning, I examined my hands. They were raw from applauding, sensitive to the touch. I ran my fingertips along the silk sheets of my bed and shuddered at the intensity of sensation. Everything felt heightened, more immediate. Colors seemed brighter. Sounds carried greater depth. Food tasted more complex, layered with flavors I had never detected before. My valet entered with breakfast. Merrin had served my family for 20 years, his face as familiar to me as my own. Yet I found myself studying his features as if seeing them anew. The asymmetry of his left eye, slightly higher than his right. The network of fine scars along his jawline from some childhood disease. The slight tremor in his right hand that had begun recently. Details I had never consciously registered now demanded my attention. "Is something wrong, my lord?" he asked, setting down the tray. "The concert last night," I said. "Did you hear anything about it?" Merrin's expression shifted subtly. "There are rumors among the staff, my lord. Some say members of the orchestra were taken to Medicaid facilities afterward. Others say they refused treatment." "Refused? Why would they refuse?" Merrin hesitated. "They claimed they were not injured, my lord, despite evidence to the contrary." I nodded. dismissing him with a wave. As the door closed, I reached for my data slate to check the cultural news feeds. They overflowed with reviews of the previous night's performance. Critics called it transcendent and consciousness-altering. Several declared it the beginning of a new artistic movement on Calixis Prime. None mentioned the blood. Over the following weeks, I attended 17 more concerts. Each featured similar elements, music that pushed beyond traditional harmony into realms that neurologists might call pain, but somehow circled back to pleasure. Musicians who sacrificed physical comfort, even safety, for their art. Audiences growing more ravenous for sensation with each performance. I received an invitation printed on what appeared to be parchment, but felt strangely warm to the touch. The elaborate script invited me to an exclusive gathering of true appreciators, hosted by Elra Vistane herself. The location was not the Grand Harmonic Hall or any venue I recognized, but an address in the abandoned pleasure districts, areas that had fallen out of fashion decades ago when the ecclesiarchy had exerted greater influence on our world. I should have reported the invitation to the Adeptus Arbites. I should have recognized the signs that something forbidden was taking root. Instead, I felt my pulse quicken with anticipation. I had always prided myself on being at the forefront of artistic movements. I told myself this was no different. The night of the gathering, I dismissed my usual security detail. I dressed in formal attire but chose pieces with subtle variations from standard noble fashion. A jacket cut asymmetrically, boots with heels slightly too high for conventional taste. A cologne blended with trace elements that created an unsettling undertone beneath the pleasant surface scent. I was already changing, already adapting to new sensibilities without conscious awareness. The building was an old theater, its facade crumbling from neglect. Yet when I approached, I noticed the deterioration followed peculiar patterns, creating an aesthetic of decay that seemed almost deliberate. The entrance was unmarked except for a small symbol etched into the cornerstone. At the time, I did not recognize its significance. Now I cannot forget it. Inside, the theater had been transformed. The seats had been removed, creating a vast open space. The walls were draped with fabrics that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of view. The air was thick with incense that made my thoughts drift sideways, like water flowing around obstacles. And the people, hundreds of them, moved through the space in ways that defied normal social interaction. Some danced to music I could barely hear. Others stood in circles, eyes closed, swaying in unison. Still others engaged in activities I could not fully comprehend from my vantage point at the entrance. A woman approached me. Her face was half concealed behind an elaborate mask, but I recognized her walk, the particular tilt of her head. "Composer Vistane," I said, bowing slightly. "Patron Var." Her voice carried the same quality as her music, notes that resonated in unexpected places. "I wondered if you would come. Your invitation intrigued me." "Not my invitation," she corrected. "I am merely a conductor, directing forces greater than myself. Come, there is someone you should meet." She led me through the crowd. Faces turned to watch our passage. I recognized many of them, nobles and artists who moved in the same circles I did. But there were others, people who would never have been admitted to the functions I typically attended. Workers from the lower levels, military personnel who should have been on duty, even robed figures who moved with the precision of the Adeptus Mechanicus. We reached a section curtained off from the main space. Elra pulled back the heavy fabric to reveal a small group seated in a circle. At their center was a device I did not immediately recognize. It resembled a musical instrument, with strings and resonating chambers, but its construction incorporated materials that made no sense for sound production. Bones, perhaps human. Crystals that pulsed with inner light, metal components that moved slightly without being touched. "The newest innovation," Elra said. "An instrument that plays the musician rather than the reverse." I should have been repulsed. I should have seen the heresy in what she described. Instead, I leaned forward with interest. "How does it work?" A man in the circle looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils so dilated that no iris was visible. "Through communion," he said. His fingers were bloody stumps, the nails torn away, yet he smiled as if experiencing utmost joy. "It teaches us the true music, the song behind all songs." "Would you like to try it?" Elra asked. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. They made space for me in the circle. The instrument was placed before me, and I was instructed to place my hands on specific points of its surface. The bone was warm, the metal cold, the crystals vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache. "Now open yourself," Elra whispered in my ear. "Let it in." I did. "Emperor, forgive me." I opened my mind without reservation. The sensation began as a whisper, like distant music carried on the wind. Then it grew, flowing into me through my fingertips, up my arms, into my chest. My heartbeat adjusted to match its rhythm. My breathing synchronized with its tempo. Behind my closed eyelids, I saw patterns forming, colors I had no names for, geometries that should not have been possible, and beneath it all, a voice, not speaking in words, but in pure emotion. It promised things. Sensations beyond anything a human nervous system was designed to process. Knowledge of harmonies that existed between the stars. Pleasures that blurred the line between ecstasy and annihilation. I do not know how long I remained connected to the instrument. When I finally opened my eyes, the gathering had changed. The pretense of a cultural event had been abandoned. What I saw then can only be described as worship. Not the dignified rituals of the Imperial cult, but something wild and abandoned. Bodies moved in configurations both beautiful and horrifying. Voices chanted in languages no human throat should produce. The air itself seemed to bend around certain participants, their forms becoming fluid, mutable. Elra stood watching me, her mask now removed. Her face was still beautiful, but changed in subtle ways that suggested modifications beyond standard cosmetic enhancements. Her smile revealed teeth filed to points. "Now you begin to hear it," she said, "the Maestra's song." "The Maestra?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "The one who conducts the great symphony of sensation, the one who will transform Calixis Prime into an instrument worthy of her touch." Elra reached out, running her fingertips along my cheek. The contact sent shocks of pleasure pain through my nervous system. "You have been chosen, Lucanvar. Your appreciation for beauty, your position, your influence, all perfect for what comes next." I should have refused. I should have fled. I should have reported everything to the authorities. Instead, I asked, "What must I do?" She smiled wider. "Simply help us arrange the next performance." That was 3 years ago. 3 years during which Calixis Prime transformed from a world of refined cultural pursuit into something the Imperium would declare anathema if they knew its true nature. 3 years during which I facilitated the spread of the Maestra's influence through every level of planetary society. 3 years during which I lost myself note by note, piece by piece, to the song that never ends. And still, the Maestra has not fully manifested. She remains a presence felt but unseen, a conductor whose baton directs us from behind a veil of reality. But soon, very soon, the grand performance will begin. The one that will tear that veil aside. I record this now as both confession and warning, though I know no one will hear it until it is far too late. I am no longer the man I was. I have become something both more and less than human. A vessel for sensations no mortal was meant to endure, a single note in a symphony of excess. And may the God Emperor forgive me, despite everything I have become, I still find it beautiful. The invitation to the inner circle came after I had arranged 7 major performances across Calixis Prime. Each had drawn larger audiences than the last. Each had pushed further beyond the boundaries of traditional art into realms that would have once been considered madness. Each had resulted in participants who emerged changed, their perceptions altered, their appetites growing increasingly specific and demanding. The Adeptus Arbites had noticed, of course. 3 of my events had been raided. But each time, The officers who burst in with weapons drawn and warnings of heresy shouted soon lowered their guns, their stern expressions softening as the music reached them. Some joined the audiences, others simply retreated, filing reports so vague and contradictory that no further action was taken. Those who proved resistant to the maestra's influence disappeared. I never asked where they went, but sometimes I thought I heard their voices incorporated into certain compositions, screams of denial transformed into notes of sublime surrender. The inner circle gathered in what had once been the planetary governor's winter palace. The governor himself now resided permanently in the palace, though he no longer governed in any meaningful sense. His body served as a vessel for experiences that required a nervous system modified beyond standard human parameters. I sometimes visited him, watched his eyes roll back in their sockets as sensations coursed through him, his mouth forming words in languages I was only beginning to understand. Elra led the inner circle now, her transformation nearly complete. Her skin had taken on an opalescent quality, shifting through subtle hues with each movement. Her voice contained harmonics that could induce states ranging from paralytic bliss to frenzy depending on her intention. When she moved, she seemed to leave faint after-images, as if reality struggled to contain her within a single position in space. "The maestra is pleased," she told us as we gathered in the former ballroom. The space had been converted into what she called a sensation chamber. Its walls were lined with materials designed to enhance and reflect sound in specific patterns. Its floor was inlaid with precious metals that conducted vibrations in ways that resonated with human bone structure. The air was processed through special filtration systems that added trace elements to enhance neurological reception. There were 12 of us in the inner circle, former nobles, artists, military commanders, even an administratum official whose access to population records had proved invaluable in identifying individuals with specific sensory sensitivities. We had all changed, each in our own way. My transformation had manifested primarily through my hands, which had elongated, the fingers now jointed in additional places, allowing me to play impossible melodies on conventional instruments. The skin had thinned to near transparency, revealing the network of nerves and vessels beneath, all of which pulsed, in time to music only I could hear. "The grand performance approaches," Elra continued, "the one that will allow the maestra to fully manifest in our realm. But first, we must prepare the audience." She gestured, and servants brought forth 12 chalices. The liquid within shifted and moved of its own accord, sometimes appearing as wine, sometimes as something thicker, darker. "Drink," she commanded, "and see the path forward." I lifted the chalice to my lips without hesitation. The liquid burned going down, then turned to ice in my stomach, then transformed into something that defied temperature altogether. My perception fragmented. I was simultaneously in the ballroom and in 1,000 other locations across Calixis Prime. I saw through countless eyes, felt through innumerable nerve endings, all experiencing different facets of the same evolving symphony. I saw workers in manufactories moving in perfect unison, their labor transformed into choreographed ritual. I saw children in skolums learning songs that rewired their developing brains. I saw ecclesiarchy priests whose sermons now contained cadences that honored the god emperor in form while channeling worship elsewhere in substance. And I saw the spaces between reality where something waited, something with too many limbs that moved with impossible grace, something whose voice was beauty and terror inseparably entwined. The maestra, still incomplete in our dimension, but growing stronger with each act of devotion performed in her name. When my consciousness fully returned to the ballroom, Elra was speaking again, outlining the plan for what she called the concordance. A synchronized planetary performance involving every citizen of Calixis Prime, willingly or otherwise. Broadcast systems repurposed to transmit specific frequencies. Water supplies treated with compounds that would enhance susceptibility. Orbital platforms repositioned to create geometric patterns that would weaken the barriers between realms. "Each of you will oversee one aspect," she said. "Lucan, your responsibility will be the central performance hall." the physical anchor point for the maestra's manifestation. I bowed my head in acceptance, honored beyond words. My thoughts were no longer my own, my identity reduced to a vessel for the maestra's will. Yet some fragment of my original self remained, watching from a distance, screaming silently behind walls of ecstatic sensation. That fragment grew stronger in the days that followed, as I oversaw the preparation of the harmonic convergence chamber. The former Grand Harmonic Hall had been expanded, its structure altered with technologies both ancient and heretical. The stage was built from the bones of those whose neural structures had proved incompatible with the maestra's influence. The acoustic panels incorporated human skin, stretched and treated to resonate at specific frequencies. The seating was arranged in spiral patterns that formed symbols visible only from above. As workers made these modifications, some part of me began to question what we were doing, not from any renewed sense of loyalty to the Imperium, but from a growing suspicion about the maestra's true intentions. The ecstasy she promised came with increasing pain. The beauty she revealed was tinged with horror. The transformations she bestowed seemed less like elevation and more like consumption. I found myself in the chamber late one night after the workers had left, standing alone on the stage. My altered hands trailed across the bone construction, feeling vibrations that traveled up my arms and into my chest. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I tried to remember who I had been before. Lucanvar, patron of arts that celebrated humanity rather than corrupted it, a man who appreciated beauty without needing to lose himself within it. Having doubts, old friend. I turned to find Marvin Cale standing in the shadows, once the commander of the planetary, defense forces, now the military arm of our cult. His transformation had taken a different course from mine. His skin had hardened into a chitinous surface, rippling with colors that expressed his emotional state. Currently, those colors swirled in patterns indicating suspicion and potential threat. Not doubts, I lied. Simply ensuring everything meets the maestra's standards. Of course. He moved closer, the clicking of his transformed feet echoing in the empty chamber. It is natural to feel overwhelmed as we approach transcendence. The human mind struggles to comprehend the glory that awaits us. Indeed. I turned away, pretending to examine the conductor's podium. The concordance will be perfect. It must be. His hand fell on my shoulder, the touch uncomfortable as the chitinous plates secreted a mild toxin that tingled against my skin. Any imperfection, any hesitation, could prove disastrous for all of us. The threat was clear. I was being watched. Any sign of wavering faith would be reported to Elra and the inner circle. I forced my face into an expression of rapturous anticipation, one I had worn genuinely until recently. I live only to serve the symphony, I said, the familiar litany falling from my lips. Marvin studied me a moment longer, then nodded. As do we all. Continue your work, Lucan. The maestra listens, always. After he left, I remained motionless, considering my position. I was embedded in the very heart of what I now recognized as a chaos cult. I had helped it spread across an entire world. I had committed atrocities in the name of art and sensation. There was no redemption possible for me, no forgiveness from the God Emperor for my transgressions. Yet something inside me rebelled against the future we were creating. Not from virtue, for I had abandoned virtue long ago, but from a growing understanding that we were not ascending to become greater beings. We were being consumed, note by note, piece by piece, to facilitate the birth of something that viewed us as nothing more than raw materials. The concordance was scheduled to begin in 3 days. 3 days in which millions of citizens would take their places in a planetary orchestra of flesh and sensation. 3 days until the maestra would fully manifest, tearing open the veil between realities to claim the world she had been cultivating through us. 3 days in which I might, possibly, find some way to disrupt the symphony. I knew I could not stop it entirely. The cult had spread too far, infected too many levels of planetary governance and society, but perhaps I could introduce a discordant note, a disruption in the carefully arranged harmonies, not enough to save Calixis Prime, but perhaps enough to alert the wider Imperium to what had happened here. Enough to ensure that when the inevitable purge came, it would be thorough, leaving nothing for the Maestra to claim. With this thought, this small rebellion against the will that had controlled me for years, I felt something crack inside my mind, a fissure in the wall of sensation that had kept me docile and compliant. Pain lanced through my altered hands, up my arms, into my chest. I fell to my knees on the stage, gasping as clarity returned in agonizing fragments. Emperor, save me! What had I become? What had I helped create? I forced myself to stand, to walk steadily out of the chamber as if nothing had changed. Inside, I began to plan, not for salvation, but for destruction. It was all I had left to offer. The next day, I continued my duties as if nothing had changed. I supervised the final adjustments to the harmonic convergence chamber. I attended the inner circle's preparatory rituals. I allowed Elra to enhance my altered hands further, biting back screams as she manipulated bone and nerve without anesthetic, shaping me into an even more perfect instrument. All the while, I watched and listened more carefully than I had in years. I noted the security protocols, the positioning of cult enforcers, the schedule for the concordance itself. I identified potential weaknesses, moments when intervention might cause maximum disruption. The plan that formed was desperate and flawed. I had access to the central sound distribution system, the technological heart that would synchronize the performances across the planet. With the right modifications, I might be able to introduce frequencies that would clash with those designed to weaken the barriers between dimensions. Not enough to prevent the Maestra from manifesting, but perhaps enough to make her manifestation unstable, vulnerable. I would die, of course. Even if by some miracle I succeeded, the inner circle would tear me apart for my betrayal. But my death had become inevitable the moment I first placed my hands on that heretical instrument years ago. All that mattered now was what meaning I might give it. The night before the concordance, I made my move. The central distribution hub was housed in what had once been the planetary governor's private observatory, a tower overlooking the capital city. Security was heavy but familiar with my presence. I cited final inspections, necessary calibrations that only my modified hands could perform with sufficient precision. They let me pass without question. The respect they showed made my stomach turn. I had earned their trust through years of faithful service to corruption. Inside the hub, I worked quickly. The system was complex, a hybrid of standard Imperial technology and modifications influenced by the Maestra's requirements. I had studied it thoroughly in my role as coordinator, knew its functions intimately. My elongated fingers moved across control interfaces, making subtle changes to frequency modulators, introducing minute variations in broadcast patterns. I was nearly finished when I sensed a presence behind me. I turned to find Elra watching, her opalescent skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the hub. "Curious adjustments you're making, Lucan," she said, her voice carrying those unnatural harmonics that made my nerves vibrate painfully. "Not part of our agreed specifications." I straightened, abandoning any pretense. "The Maestra isn't offering ascension. She's harvesting us, consuming us. You must see that, Elra." She tilted her head, an oddly mechanical gesture. "Of course she is consuming us. That is the ultimate communion, the perfect union of worshipper and deity. To be taken into her, to become part of her eternal song." She moved closer, fluid and predatory. "I thought you understood this. I thought you embraced it." "I was blind," I said, "seduced by sensations I mistook for enlightenment. But now I see what we're actually building. Not transcendence, annihilation." Such a limited perspective. Her hand shot out, faster than human reflexes should allow, gripping my throat. "There is no meaningful distinction between transcendence and annihilation. Both require the end of what you currently are." I struggled against her grip, finding her strength immensely greater than her form suggested. My altered hands clawed at her arm, drawing blood that shimmered with unnatural colors. "The concordance will proceed as planned," she said, her face inches from mine. "The only question is whether you will participate willingly, honored as one who helped bring about this glorious transformation, or whether you will serve simply as material." Another screaming note in the maestra's arrival symphony. In that moment, I realized I had never had any chance of disruption. The changes I had made to the distribution system were already being reversed by automated systems responding to the discrepancy. My small rebellion had been anticipated, perhaps even expected as a final test of my devotion. Elra released me, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping. "Why not kill me now?" I managed to ask. "Because the maestra has special plans for you, old friend. Your sensitivity to her music, your exquisite nervous system, your position at the heart of the harmonic convergence chamber. You are to be her voice, the physical vessel through which she will first speak to her new domain." Elra's smile widened beyond human limits. "Is that not the honor you have worked toward all these years?" The horror that filled me then was absolute. Not death, but a fate infinitely worse. To be conscious as my identity was erased, my body repurposed as a mouthpiece for the thing we had worshipped. To be aware as the maestra used me to spread her influence beyond Calixis Prime to other worlds. "Tomorrow, you will take your place on the conductor's podium," Elra said. "You will begin the performance exactly as rehearsed. And when the moment comes, you will surrender yourself completely." She turned to leave, then paused. "Guards will escort you to your chambers and remain with you until the concordance begins, for your own protection, of course." After she left, cult enforcers entered the hub. They handled me with careful respect, as one might handle a valuable but potentially fragile instrument. They escorted me to my quarters in the former governor's palace, positioned themselves outside my door. Alone, I sank onto the edge of my bed, despair overwhelming me. I had failed. Tomorrow, I would become the voice of a daemon, my identity subsumed into its essence. And Calixis Prime would fall completely, transformed into a garden of sensory horrors, a breeding ground for corruption that would eventually spread to neighboring systems. In my despair, my hands began to move of their own accord, playing silent melodies on invisible instruments. A habit they had developed over the years of transformation. I watched their movement, the unnatural fluidity of too many joints, the transparency of skin revealing the complex network beneath. My hands, modified specifically to conduct the opening movements of the concordance, to direct the planetary orchestra in perfect synchronization. And in that moment, I saw my one remaining option, not to prevent the maestra's coming, for that was now inevitable, not to save Calixis Prime, for it was already lost, but perhaps, just perhaps, to ensure that what emerged tomorrow would be flawed, imperfect, vulnerable to the Imperial response that must eventually come. I studied my quarters. Luxury befitting my status in the cult surrounded me. Among the furnishings was a small shrine to the maestra, featuring a crystalline sculpture that approximated her theorized form. Sharp edges, perfect for my purpose. I approached the shrine, knelt before it as if in prayer. The guards outside would expect such behavior on the eve of the concordance. With deliberate care, I lifted the sculpture, testing its weight, the sharpness of its edges. Then, with no hesitation, I brought it down hard against my left hand. The pain was exquisite, a symphony of agony as crystal shattered bone and severed the specialized nerve bundles Elra had so carefully cultivated. Blood flowed, shimmering with unnatural colors. I bit my lip to stifle my scream, tasting copper and something else, something that fizzed against my tongue like forbidden stimulants. Before shock could set in, I repeated the process with my right hand. The second impact was worse, nerves already alight with pain from the first injury. This time, I could not contain the sound that escaped me, though I managed to transform it into something that might have been mistaken for ecstatic worship. I collapsed beside the shrine, my ruined hands before me, blood pooling on the ornate floor. The specialized modifications were destroyed beyond quick repair. Without them, I could not conduct as planned. Without perfect conduction, the concordance would be flawed. The maestra would still come, but perhaps in a form less stable, less capable of extending her influence beyond our already damned world. The door burst open. Guards rushed in, alerted by the sound or perhaps by some psychic awareness of my betrayal. Their expressions shifted from concern to horror as they saw what I had done. "Restrain him! Get the flesh shapers!" one shouted. They seized me, unmindful of my injuries, dragging me from the shrine. My blood left a trail across the polished floor, each droplet containing fragments of the modifications that had made me so valuable to the cult. I laughed as they carried me away, a sound as broken as my hands. I had introduced my discordant note after all, not through technology, but through self-mutilation. The concordance would proceed, but without its designated conductor, without the perfect vessel the maestra had cultivated for years. It was little enough rebellion, pathetic really, but it was all I had left to offer in penance for what I had helped create. They took me to a chamber deep beneath the palace, a place of pain and transformation where the cult's flesh shapers worked their heretical arts. Elra was there, her expression a mixture of fury and fascination. "You surprise me, Lucan," she said as they strapped me to an operating table. "Such dedication to imperfection, such commitment to failure. The maestra deserves nothing less," I replied, my voice weak from pain but steady in purpose. "You think this changes anything? You think we have no contingencies?" She gestured, and a figure stepped forward from the shadows. I recognized him vaguely, a minor noble who had joined our cult in its early days. His transformation had been minimal, focused internally rather than externally. "Vareth has studied your techniques. His hands are already partially modified. By morning, he will be ready to take your place." My moment of defiance collapsed into renewed despair. Of course they had backups, alternatives, contingencies. The maestra's plans would not be so easily disrupted. "But you, Lucan," Elra continued, "you still have a role to play. Not as conductor, no, but as instrument." She nodded to the flesh shapers who surrounded the table. "Prepare him. The specifications have changed, but his nervous system remains exceptional. The maestra will still have use for him." What followed was torment beyond description. They worked without anesthesia, explaining that pain would keep the necessary neural pathways active. They salvaged what they could of my specialized modifications, repurposing them for a different function. They added new elements, harvested from unwilling donors brought into the chamber. Through it all, I remained conscious, my screams eventually giving way to whimpers, then to a detached observation of my own reconstruction. I felt myself slipping away, the identity that was Lucan Var fragmenting under the assault of pain and horrific transformation. Yet some core of me remained, witnessing what I was becoming. By morning, I was unrecognizable. My ruined hands had been removed entirely, replaced with appendages that resembled sound-producing organs more than human limbs. My torso had been opened, ribcage modified to create a resonating chamber. My vocal cords had been altered, multiplied, capable of producing harmonics no human should generate. I had become a living instrument, designed to be played during the concordance. Not the conductor I was meant to be, but a specialized component in the planetary orchestra. A vessel for specific frequencies that would help tear the veil between dimensions. They transported me to the harmonic convergence chamber as dawn broke over the capital city. Outside, I glimpsed masses of citizens moving toward their designated positions for the planetary performance. Some walked with purpose, willing participants in the cult that had spread through every level of society. Others moved jerkily, their bodies no longer fully their own, puppeted by the influence that had seeped into the world's water, food, and air. Inside the chamber, the inner circle gathered on the stage. Elra at the center, now so transformed she barely resembled a human. Beside her stood Vareth, his hands modified in a crude approximation of what mine had been. Not perfect, but functional enough for the task ahead. They positioned me at the edge of the stage, alongside other living instruments created for the performance. Former humans whose bodies had been reshaped to serve specific acoustic functions. I recognized some of them, former friends and rivals from my days as a patron of legitimate arts, now, like me, reduced to components in the maestra's grand design. The audience filled the chamber, thousands of the cult's most devoted followers. Their anticipation was palpable, a psychic pressure that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Many showed signs of transformation, modifications both deliberate and spontaneous, as the barrier between realities already began to thin. Elra addressed them, her voice carrying those impossible harmonics that vibrated through flesh and bone. The moment approaches. The concordance begins. The maestra comes. Vareth took his position at the conductor's podium. His movements lacked the fluid grace mine would have had, but he raised his modified hands with adequate precision. Around the planet, I knew, other conductors would be mirroring his gesture, preparing to synchronize the planetary orchestra of flesh and sensation. The first notes began, emanating not from conventional instruments but from the living ones arranged around the stage. A woman whose torso had been transformed into something resembling a wind instrument produced a sound that slithered through the air, coiling around the audience members, making them shudder in anticipation. A man whose spine had been reconfigured into a percussion instrument was struck by specialized mallets, his screams of agony transformed into rhythmic pulses that established the performance's foundation. Then it was my turn. Elra herself approached me, her transformed hands hovering over the apparatus that had once been my body. Her touch was simultaneously gentle and excruciating, activating nerve clusters specifically redesigned for this moment. I felt sound pour from me, forced through the resonating chambers that had replaced my vital organs, escaping through orifices that had once been my mouth, my nostrils, my ears. The sound I produced was not music as I had once understood it. It was pure sensation translated into acoustic form, the sum total of my experiences, my transformations, my gradual corruption, all distilled into frequencies designed to weaken reality itself. My consciousness fragmented further with each note drawn from me, shards of identity swept away in currents of sound. Yet that stubborn core remained. The observer, the witness, the fragment that still called itself Lucan Var. It clung to existence through the torrent of sensation, watching through eyes that were no longer entirely my own as the concordance progressed. The chamber's acoustics amplified and shaped our outputs, focusing them toward the center of the stage. There, a space had been prepared, marked with symbols etched in materials I could not identify. As the performance intensified, that space began to change. The air shimmered, then rippled, then parted like fabric torn by unseen hands. Through that tear, something began to emerge. Not all at once, not completely. First came tendrils of sound made visible, curling through the opening between dimensions. They probed the chamber, touching audience members who moaned in response, their bodies arching toward the contact. The tendrils thickened, gained substance, transformed from sound to matter, while somehow remaining both simultaneously. Colors followed, spilling through the tear, colors that should not exist in our spectrum, that human eyes should not be able to process. They flowed across the stage, pooling around the living instruments, seeping into us through skin and orifices both natural and constructed. Where they touched, flesh transformed further, becoming less solid, more malleable. The audience's reaction intensified. Some fell to their knees in worship, others tore at their clothing, their skin, offering themselves to the presence that continued to manifest. Still others began to change spontaneously, their bodies reshaping in response to the proximity of the entity they had served. Throughout it all, the performance continued. Vareth, conducting with increasing confidence, as the maestra's influence strengthened his connection to the music. Elra moving between the living instruments, adjusting, enhancing, extracting maximum output as the moment of complete manifestation approached. I felt the maestra's attention turn to me specifically, a focus that penetrated beyond my physical form, beyond the fragmentary consciousness that remained, probing for the core of rebellion that had led me to mutilate my hands. I tried to shield that last piece of myself, to hide the witness that still observed with horror what we had wrought. But her awareness was too penetrating, too all-encompassing. "I know you, Lucanvar." The words formed directly in my mind. Bypassing ears I no longer possessed. They carried harmonics of amusement, of appreciation for my small rebellion, of anticipation for what was to come. "Your resistance adds savor to your eventual surrender. The dissonance you hope to introduce merely enhances the final harmony." Images flooded my consciousness. Visions of what Calixis Prime would become under her dominion. Spires of living flesh rising from the surface, their architecture an affront to reason and natural law. Processions of transformed citizens engaged in rituals of adoration that consumed them note by note, piece by piece, their essence drawn into the growing presence of the Maestra. The planetary defense systems repurposed to broadcast the world's transformation across the sector, a siren song drawing the curious, the sensation seekers, the potentially corruptible. And, at the center of it all, what remained of me. Not dead, never, granted that mercy. Preserved as the Maestra's voice, the instrument through which she would extend her influence beyond this single world. Conscious enough to witness the consequences of what I had helped create, but powerless to affect the symphony I now served. The horror of this future might have broken me completely had something else not intervened. A new sound, discordant with the carefully orchestrated performance. A wailing that cut through the harmonics of the concordance like a knife through flesh. Warning klaxons, triggering throughout the palace. The performance faltered. Vareth's concentration broke, his hands freezing mid-gesture. Elra spun toward the chamber's entrance, her transformed features contorting in a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Impossible," she hissed, the word carrying harmonics of genuine fear. "We neutralized all resistance. We controlled every system." The chamber doors burst inward. Figures entered, but not the cult enforcers I expected. These wore armor of midnight blue, their helmets adorned with white crests. Storm bolters and power swords at the ready, they advanced into the chamber in perfect formation. Behind them came more warriors, these in the black armor of the Death Watch, specialists in confronting the alien and the demonic. Space Marines, the Emperor's finest, somehow on Calixis Prime, somehow breaching the heart of our cult at the very moment of the Maestra's manifestation. Their timing could not be coincidence. Their presence could not be chance. Someone had warned them, brought them here precisely when the veil between realities was at its thinnest, when the Maestra was most vulnerable in her transition between dimensions. Elra screamed, the sound shattering the crystal fixtures throughout the chamber. "Continue the performance, complete the manifestation, the Maestra will protect us." The living instruments, myself included, were still bound to obey. Sound poured from us with renewed intensity, driving toward the tear in reality where the Maestra's partial form still coalesced. The audience surged toward the Space Marines, a tide of corrupted flesh and fanatical devotion. Bolt rounds answered them, explosive shells tearing through transformed bodies. The Marines advanced methodically, veterans of countless battles against chaos and its servants. They had come prepared, their tactics precise, their purpose absolute, but they were outnumbered thousands to one. And with each passing moment, the Maestra's manifestation progressed, her power growing, her influence over the physical laws of the chamber strengthening. Space Marines staggered as gravity shifted around them, as sound became solid enough to impede movement, as colors leached the strength from enhanced muscles. "The device," one of them voxed, his voice carrying through the cacophony. "Deploy it now, or we lose the window." A Marine in Deathwatch black stepped forward, a mechanism in his gauntleted hands unlike anything I had seen before. Not a weapon in the conventional sense. Something that hummed with power of a different kind, with frequencies that clashed against those we produced. An anathema, a creation designed specifically to counter the harmonics of the Maestra's manifestation. He activated it at the chamber's threshold. The effect was immediate and devastating. The sound from the living instruments distorted, refracted, turned back upon itself. The colors spilling through the dimensional tear shattered into fragments, their impossible hues breaking down into component spectra. The tear itself began to contract, the fabric of reality reasserting its integrity. The maestra's presence recoiled, tendrils withdrawing from the physical world. Her partially manifested form began to lose cohesion, dissolving back into the sound and color from which it had been coalescing. No, this is not the finale. This is merely an intermission. Her thoughts lashed through my consciousness, through the minds of every cult member in the chamber. Rage and promise intertwined. I will return for what is mine, all that you are, all that you might become, reserved for my eternal symphony. The dimensional tear snapped closed with a sound that transcended volume, becoming pure concussive force. It threw everyone in the chamber to the ground, Marines and cultists alike. The living instruments, myself included, felt something tear free from our transformed bodies. The specialized modifications, the resonating chambers, the sound-producing appendages, all suddenly inert, disconnected from the will that had animated them. In the silence that followed, I found I could move. Not well, not completely, but enough to turn what remained of my head toward the Space Marines who now regained their footing, resuming their advance across the chamber. Elra rose before them, her transformed body still formidable even with the maestra's presence withdrawn. "This changes nothing," she snarled, harmonics still lingering in her voice. "The performance has begun. It cannot be stopped, merely delayed. The maestra has marked this world. She will return." "Perhaps," answered the Marine with the anathema device. He removed his helmet, revealing a face aged beyond his physical years, eyes that had witnessed horrors across centuries of service. An Ordo Malleus Inquisitor accompanied him, a man whose stern features suggested no capacity for mercy. "But you will not be here to witness it." What followed was execution, not battle. The cultists fought, of course. Those with combat abilities engaged the Marines directly. Those with psychic modifications attempted to turn the Marines' minds against them. Those with purely physical transformations hurled themselves forward as living weapons. None of it mattered. The Space Marines had come prepared for every contingency, their experience with chaos cults evident in their methodical responses. The chamber became a charnel house, bolt rounds and power weapons reducing the inner circle to unrecognizable masses of corrupted flesh. Elra was among the last to fall, her transformed body requiring the attention of 3 Marines before it finally collapsed. Her final words were not defiance or bargaining, but a sequence of notes, a fragment of the maestra's symphony, preserved and projected with her dying breath. When it was over, when the chamber held nothing but corpses and dying cultists, the Inquisitor approached what remained of me. His expression showed neither disgust nor pity as he examined the travesty my body had become. "This one still lives," he noted, "and retains consciousness, if I am not mistaken." The Marine commander joined him, a component in their ritual, once human, extensively modified, terminated with the others. The Inquisitor studied me more carefully, noting details of my transformation, perhaps recognizing the specialized function I had been redesigned to serve. "No. This one might provide valuable intelligence. The corruption on this world runs deeper than we initially assessed. The warning we received was accurate but incomplete." Warning, the word echoed through my fragmentary consciousness. Someone had warned them. Someone had brought the Imperium's wrath to Calixis Prime at the precise moment of vulnerability. The Inquisitor seemed to read the question in what remained of my eyes. "Yes, we were warned. A message transmitted on frequencies the Inquisition monitors for signs of warp intrusion, crude but effective. It detailed the cult's plans, the timing of this concordance, the specific harmonics that would be employed." His head tilted slightly. "It originated from this very chamber, mere hours before our arrival. Transmitted through the same distribution system meant to synchronize your heretical performance." Understanding bloomed in what remained of my mind. my failed attempt to modify the distribution system. Elra had caught me, had prevented me from introducing discordant frequencies into the concordance, but she hadn't realized I had already done something else. A desperate transmission, composed while adjusting the system's controls. A confession and a warning, sent blindly into the void on frequencies I knew would attract attention from those who monitored for warp activity. I had not failed completely after all. My small rebellion had borne unexpected fruit. "Bring it," the Inquisitor instructed. "Our biologists will determine if any intelligence can be extracted. After that, the appropriate rites of purification." As marine hands lifted what remained of my body, I felt a sense of completion. Not redemption, for there could be no redemption for what I had done, for the world I had helped corrupt. But perhaps a measure of atonement. The Maestra had been denied her full manifestation. The Imperium had been alerted to the corruption on Calixis Prime. The inevitable purification would follow, cleansing with fire what could not be saved by other means. In the days that followed, I learned the extent of the Imperial response. 3 Space Marine chapters had coordinated the assault on Calixis Prime, striking simultaneously at key locations across the planet. The cult's influence had spread further than even I had realized, reaching nearly 90% of the population. The Inquisition determined the world could not be salvaged. They extracted what information they could from survivors like me, piecing together the cult's history, methodology, and connections to other systems. They identified vectors of corruption that extended beyond Calixis Prime, dispatching forces to investigate and contain potential outbreaks before they could mature. And finally, when all useful intelligence had been gathered, they implemented the final solution. From orbit, they unleashed virus bombs that swept across the planet's surface, destroying all organic matter, purging every trace of the Maestra's influence from the corrupted ecosystem. I witnessed it all through augmetic eyes installed by the Inquisition's biologist adepts, my consciousness preserved within a specialized life support system, not out of mercy, but because my intimate knowledge of the cult's practices made me temporarily valuable. I helped them identify subtle signs of corruption, recognize specialized harmonics that indicated the Maestra's influence, understand the transformational techniques the cult had employed. When my usefulness ended, I expected execution. Instead, the Inquisitor offered an alternative. "Your soul is beyond redemption," he told me, his voice matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "But your experience has value. There are others like the entity you served. Others who would corrupt through sensation and excess. The Imperium maintains certain repositories of knowledge about such threats. Your consciousness could contribute to that understanding." It was not life he offered, but a form of continued existence. My remaining organic components would be preserved in specialized suspension, my consciousness accessible to inquisitors and scholars with appropriate clearance. A research specimen, a cautionary example, a source of insight into corruption I had experienced firsthand. I accepted, of course. The alternative was oblivion, an end to the witness I had become. And some fragment of me still wished to serve, to counter in some small way the evil I had helped create. They transferred my consciousness to its final housing in a facility whose location I was not permitted to know. A place of forbidden knowledge and contained corruption, where the Imperium studied its most insidious enemies. My organic components were suspended in specialized fluid, connected to augmetic interfaces that allowed authorized individuals to access my memories, my experiences, my understanding of the Maestra and her methods. And here I remain, neither living nor dead. A consciousness preserved beyond its natural span, a witness to corruption that continues to share its testimony. Centuries have passed since Calixis Prime was purged from existence. The officials who interrogate me now are distant successors of the Inquisitor who ordered my preservation. The questions change as new threats emerge, as the Imperium's understanding of chaos evolves, but my function remains constant. I am memory, I am warning, I am testament to how easily human pursuits can be corrupted, how the appreciation of beauty and sensation can be twisted into worship of that which should never be worshipped. I am what remains of Lucan Var, once patron of arts, then servant of corruption, now neither fully human nor completely machine. And sometimes, in the silence between interrogations, I hear it still. Faint but unmistakable. Fragments of the maestra's symphony, preserved within what remains of my transformed nervous system. Harmonics that whisper of her continued existence in the Imperium, of her patient wait for another world, another culture ripe for corruption, another opportunity to manifest. The music never truly ends. It merely changes form, adapts, finds new instruments to play. And I, who once conducted its preliminary movements, now serve as warning of what happens when the pursuit of sensation becomes worship of excess, when art becomes heresy, when beauty becomes abomination. Listen well to my account, you who access these records. The symphony continues, with or without Calixis Prime, with or without Lucan Var. The maestra and her kind wait beyond the veil, patient and eternal, seeking those who might invite them in through weakness or ambition or simple human desire for experience beyond the ordinary. Listen well, and remember, in the dark millennium in which we live, there is only war. But before the war, before the corruption, before the fall, there is always music. Beautiful, seductive, promising transcendence while delivering damnation. The music never ends. But perhaps, armed with the knowledge of those who have fallen before, you might recognize its opening notes before it is too late. I am Lucan Var. I was patron, then instrument, now warning. And the song plays on.